You don't always feel smart when you're actually intelligent. In fact, many intelligent people spend years believing the opposite. That's because real intelligence rarely looks loud or confident from the inside. It often feels like doubt, curiosity, restlessness, and constant questioning. If you've ever felt like you're missing something, while others seem so sure, it may already be a sign. Intelligence doesn't announce itself with certainty. It hides behind awareness. Smarter minds notice complexity where others see simplicity. They hesitate because they see more angles. They pause because they understand consequences. You might replay conversations long after they end, not because you're weak, but because your brain is searching for patterns, meanings, and improvements. You analyze what you said, what others meant, and what could have gone differently. This mental replay isn't overthinking by default. It's cognitive depth without guidance. Highly intelligent people often assume everyone thinks this way. They underestimate themselves because they normalize their own complexity. They don't feel special for thinking deeply. They assume it's basic. So when someone else speaks confidently, even incorrectly, it feels like they know more. Confidence gets mistaken for intelligence. But confidence often comes from simplicity, not depth. Smart people are aware of what they don't know. That awareness creates humility. And humility feels like inadequacy in a loud world. You might struggle to explain your thoughts clearly, not because they're shallow, but because they're layered. Your ideas don't come in straight lines. They come as webs. Turning a web into a sentence takes effort. So you stay quiet. Others talk faster and simpler. They get rewarded socially. You get overlooked. Over time, you start believing silence equals lack. But silence can also mean internal richness. Another sign is boredom with shallow conversation. Small talk drains you quickly. Not because you dislike people, but because your mind seeks substance. You crave meaning, not noise. You think about why people behave the way they do. You question systems, norms, and assumptions. You don't accept things just because that's how it is. This questioning can make you feel disconnected. You feel out of sync. But this friction is a hallmark of intelligence. Smart minds resist mental autopilot. They need coherence. You may also be emotionally sensitive. You feel things deeply. You notice shifts in tone, energy, and mood. This sensitivity often gets mislabeled as weakness. But emotional intelligence is still intelligence. It requires perception, integration, and regulation. Many intelligent people were told they're too much or too sensitive. So they learn to hide. They learn to downplay their insight. They learn to doubt themselves. You may procrastinate, not from laziness, but from perfectionism. Your standards are high because your vision is detailed. Starting feels overwhelming because you see the whole mountain at once. Others see only the next step. You judge yourself harshly for delays, but the delay is often cognitive load. Your brain is trying to build a complete internal map before acting. Another sign is loneliness, even among people. You feel unseen, not because you're antisocial, but because few people engage at your depth. You adapt to survive socially. You simplify yourself. You shrink your language. You censor curiosity. That self-reduction is exhausting. And exhaustion makes you feel less capable. But fatigue is not stupidity. It's misalignment. You also tend to learn things intuitively. You connect dots subconsciously. Sometimes you just know something without being able to explain how. This makes you doubt your conclusions. You wait for proof others demand. But intuition is pattern recognition accumulated over time. It's intelligence operating below language. Smart people also change their minds. They update beliefs when new information appears. This flexibility gets mistaken for indecision. But rigidity is easier than accuracy. You value truth over ego. That alone puts you ahead. You may struggle with traditional definitions of success. You don't feel motivated by status alone. You question goals you're supposed to want. This creates confusion and self-doubt. But questioning inherited goals is cognitive independence. Another sign is mental fatigue without visible effort. You get tired from thinking, not doing. Your mind never fully rests. It scans, collects, evaluates. You also notice that learning excites you more than proving. You don't enjoy showing off what you know. You enjoy discovering what you don't. This makes you less visible in competitive spaces. You don't fight to be the loudest voice. You wait for accuracy. You wait for relevance. By the time you speak, the moment may have passed, so you stay quiet. Others fill the silence. They get credit. You get invisible. This invisibility feeds the illusion that you're behind. But often, you're simply operating on a different timeline. You think long-term. You're less reactive. You may struggle with authority that lacks logic. Rules without reason irritate you. You ask why more than how. This can cause friction in structured environments. Teachers, bosses, and systems reward compliance more than curiosity. So your intelligence doesn't always get reinforced. Instead, it gets suppressed. You may also experience imposter syndrome. You assume you fooled people into overestimating you. You attribute success to luck, failure to personal flaw. This bias distorts self-perception. The smarter you are, the more you see how much there is to know. That awareness shrinks your sense of competence. Less aware people feel confident because they see less. You might prefer solitude, not because you hate people, but because solitude reduces noise. It allows your mind to stretch. You think more clearly alone. You process emotions privately. You recharge in silence. This preference gets labeled as antisocial. But solitude is often where intelligent minds thrive. You also ask uncomfortable questions about life, meaning, morality, and identity. Questions without easy answers. These questions don't make daily life easier. They make it heavier. Carrying that weight can feel like weakness, but it's existential intelligence at work. You may also feel chronically dissatisfied, not because nothing is enough, but because you sense potential everywhere. You see what could be improved. You notice inefficiencies. You imagine alternatives. This constant comparison between reality and possibility creates restlessness. Others accept what is. You question it. Questioning feels like discontent, but it's also innovation's starting point. You might struggle to celebrate small wins. Your mind immediately moves to the next layer, the next problem, the next idea. This robs you of satisfaction. And without satisfaction, you assume failure. But the issue isn't ability, it's calibration. You hold yourself to internal metrics others don't see. Another sign is that you learn deeply but slowly. You don't skim. You integrate. Once learned, you rarely forget. But speed-based systems punish depth. So you feel behind. You compare your pace to others. You ignore retention and understanding. Smart people often bloom late. Their growth is non-linear. They build foundations quietly. Then suddenly, everything connects. From the outside, it looks sudden. Inside, it took years. You also notice contradictions easily. You're uncomfortable with simplistic narratives. You resist extremes. This makes it hard to pick a side. People mistake this for lack of conviction. But nuance requires intelligence. Binary thinking is easier. You may also struggle to explain your intelligence. You don't fit stereotypes. You don't feel brilliant. You feel confused, curious, tired, and thoughtful. But intelligence isn't a feeling. It's a function. And many intelligent functions are invisible internally, especially in a world that rewards noise over nuance. Intelligence does not always announce itself loudly. In fact, some of the smartest people move through the world quietly, observing more than they reveal. If you often pause before responding, replay conversations in your head, or think deeply about things others dismiss quickly. This is not hesitation. It is cognitive depth. A sharp mind doesn't rush to react. It evaluates, connects patterns, and weighs consequences before speaking. That's why highly intelligent people are often mistaken for being slow or unsure, when in reality, their minds are processing far more information than what is visible. Another subtle sign of intelligence is mental discomfort with oversimplified answers. When you hear easy explanations for complex problems and feel an inner resistance, that's your brain refusing to accept shallow reasoning. Intelligent minds are naturally skeptical, not cynical, but curious. They sense when something doesn't fully add up. This is why intelligent people often feel misunderstood. Their inner world is rich and interconnected, but language can feel limiting. Emotional sensitivity is another overlooked marker of intelligence. If you pick up on subtle changes in tone, notice tension others ignore, or feel deeply affected by the emotional atmosphere of a room, your brain is processing social and emotional data at a high level. This sensitivity can be exhausting, but it is not weakness. It is advanced perception. Many intelligent people learn to downplay this sensitivity to survive socially, but it remains active beneath the surface. Highly intelligent people also tend to question themselves more than others. Instead of assuming they are right, they reflect, doubt, and re-evaluate. This self-questioning is often mistaken for low confidence, but it is actually intellectual honesty. When you are aware of how much you don't know, arrogance becomes difficult. Intelligence often comes with humility, not certainty. Finally, if you feel mentally tired even when you haven't done much physically, that's another quiet sign. Deep thinking consumes energy. Constant analysis, imagination, emotional processing, and reflection place a heavy load on the brain. The exhaustion you feel isn't laziness, it's cognitive overuse. Your mind is always working, even when you appear still. Another strong indicator of hidden intelligence is your relationship with boredom. If repetitive tasks drain you quickly or make you feel restless, it's often because your brain craves stimulation, novelty, and meaning. Intelligent minds struggle with monotony because they are wired to explore, question, and connect ideas. This doesn't mean you lack discipline. It means your mind functions best when engaged with depth rather than routine. You may also notice that you replay mistakes long after others have moved on. While this can feel like self-criticism, it often reflects a strong learning instinct. Intelligent people extract lessons from experience, sometimes excessively. They analyze what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and how to avoid repeating the same pattern. The downside is rumination, but the upside is long-term growth. People who are smarter than they think often feel out of sync with the world around them. Small talk feels draining. Surface-level goals feel empty. You may sense that something important is missing, even when life appears fine on the outside. This feeling doesn't mean you are ungrateful or difficult. It often means your values are deeper than the environment you are in. Intelligent minds seek alignment, not just success. Another subtle sign is your discomfort with rigid rules and fixed identities. You may resist labels, traditions, or "this is how it's always been done" thinking. This isn't rebellion for attention. It's cognitive flexibility. Intelligent people naturally question systems, norms, and assumptions. They don't reject structure entirely, but they need to understand why something exists before accepting it. If you often imagine alternative outcomes, different lives, or hypothetical scenarios, this is another marker. Your brain is running simulations. This ability fuels creativity, empathy, and strategic thinking. While it can lead to overthinking, it also allows you to anticipate consequences and understand perspectives others miss. Lastly, if you've ever felt that your intelligence hasn't translated into visible success yet, that doesn't mean it isn't real. Many intelligent people develop slowly because they are internally building frameworks rather than chasing quick wins. They prioritize understanding over speed. And while this can make them feel behind, it often leads to deeper fulfillment later in life. Intelligence isn't always loud, confident, or obvious. Sometimes it looks like doubt, sensitivity, quiet observation, and mental fatigue. And many people who are smarter than they think spend years believing the opposite, simply because their intelligence doesn't fit the stereotypes they were taught to recognize. Another quiet sign of intelligence is how deeply you internalize experiences. While others move on quickly, you absorb moments, conversations, and emotional exchanges and carry them with you. Your mind doesn't just register what happened. It analyzes why it happened, how it felt, and what it revealed about people involved. This deep internal processing often makes life feel heavier, but it also builds wisdom over time. You're not living on the surface of experiences. You're extracting meaning from them. You may also find that praise feels uncomfortable or undeserved. Intelligent people are often acutely aware of their own limitations. Instead of focusing on what they do well, they see what could be improved. This creates a gap between how others perceive them and how they perceive themselves. While this can reduce confidence, it also fuels continuous learning. Your standards are high, not because you want validation, but because you see potential more clearly. Another overlooked indicator is your ability to see both sides of an argument, even when one side opposes your own beliefs. This doesn't mean you lack principles. It means your thinking is flexible enough to understand complexity without collapsing into extremes. Many intelligent people struggle in debates not because they are wrong, but because they can see too many valid angles at once. Certainty feels dishonest when reality is layered. If you've ever felt emotionally older than your age, that's another sign. Intelligence often accelerates emotional development. You may have learned early how to read people, manage situations, or think long term. This can create a sense of isolation, especially when peers seem focused on things that feel trivial to you. Being mentally ahead doesn't always feel like an advantage when connection is what you crave. Highly intelligent people also tend to self-edit heavily. You might stop yourself from speaking because you anticipate misunderstanding, conflict, or simplification. Over time, this creates a habit of internal dialogue replacing external expression. Your mind becomes a crowded place, full of thoughts that rarely leave. This doesn't mean your voice lacks value. It means you've learned restraint, sometimes at the cost of visibility. Finally, if you've ever felt that your intelligence makes life harder rather than easier, you're not imagining it. Awareness increases responsibility. Seeing consequences means you can't unsee them. Knowing patterns means you can't ignore them. And that weight is something many intelligent people carry quietly, without recognition. Another strong sign of intelligence is your sensitivity to inconsistency. When words don't match actions, when values aren't reflected in behavior, or when logic contradicts itself, you notice immediately. This can make relationships and systems feel frustrating because you see cracks others are willing to ignore. You don't just accept reality as it's presented. You sense when something beneath the surface is off. You may also struggle with motivation in environments that feel meaningless. Intelligent minds are driven by purpose, not pressure alone. When tasks lack significance, your energy drops, even if you are capable of completing them. This is often mistaken for laziness or lack of ambition, but it's actually value-based cognition. Your brain asks, why, before it gives effort. Another subtle indicator is your relationship with solitude. While you may crave connection, you also need time alone to recalibrate. Solitude allows your thoughts to settle, connect, and reorganize. Intelligent people often feel overstimulated by constant social input because their minds are already busy. Alone time isn't avoidance, it's mental maintenance. You might also notice that you struggle with traditional measures of success. Timelines, milestones, and external benchmarks can feel arbitrary. This doesn't mean you lack goals. It means your goals are internal rather than performative. You're more interested in understanding yourself and your direction than proving something to others. This can make progress feel invisible, but it is still progress. If you've ever been labeled as too intense, too serious, or too thoughtful, that's often a response to intelligence rather than personality flaws. Depth can be intimidating. People are comfortable with surface-level engagement because it's predictable. Depth invites reflection, and reflection can be uncomfortable. Lastly, intelligent people often carry an underlying sense of responsibility toward the world. You feel affected by injustice, inefficiency, and suffering, even when it doesn't touch you directly. This empathy isn't naive. It's informed. You understand cause and effect, systems and consequences. And while this awareness can feel heavy, it also reflects a mind capable of seeing beyond itself. Intelligence is not always confidence, speed, or charisma. Sometimes it's quiet awareness, internal conflict, and the constant effort to make sense of a complex world. And many people who possess it spend years underestimating themselves, not because they lack intelligence, but because they were taught to look for it in the wrong places. Another sign you're smarter than you think is how often you feel mentally conflicted. You don't move through life with simple certainty. Instead, you weigh decisions carefully, sometimes painfully so. You imagine outcomes, unintended consequences, and emotional impacts before acting. This internal debate can feel exhausting, but it's a reflection of advanced foresight. Your brain doesn't just react to the present moment. It projects into the future. That ability can slow action, but it also prevents reckless choices. You may also notice that you question your own emotions instead of blindly following them. Rather than assuming every feeling is truth, you analyze where it comes from and what it means. This emotional metacognition is a strong indicator of intelligence. Many people feel without understanding. You feel and then investigate. That process builds emotional regulation, even if it sometimes feels like self-doubt. Another subtle marker is your discomfort with shallow validation. Likes, praise, and quick approval may feel empty or temporary to you. You might crave recognition, but only when it feels genuine and earned. This makes you harder to impress and harder to satisfy, not because you're ungrateful, but because your standards for meaning are high. Superficial success doesn't quiet your mind the way understanding does. If you often feel like you're living slightly ahead or behind your time, that's another clue. You may struggle to fully belong in dominant cultural trends, conversations, or priorities. This sense of being out of sync often comes from independent thinking. You're not unconsciously following scripts. You're evaluating them. And evaluation naturally creates distance. Intelligent people also tend to replay conversations not out of insecurity, but curiosity. You revisit words, tone, pauses, and reactions, trying to understand what was really said beneath the surface. This makes you socially perceptive, even if it doesn't always make you socially relaxed. Awareness can interfere with ease, but it deepens understanding. Finally, if you've ever felt that your mind is both your greatest strength and your biggest burden, that paradox itself is a sign. Intelligence expands perception, but it also expands responsibility. You see more, feel more, and think more. And that complexity doesn't always translate into visible advantages, especially early in life. Another overlooked sign of intelligence is your resistance to black and white thinking. You're uncomfortable with extremes, absolutes, and rigid moral certainty. Instead of asking who is right or wrong, you ask what led here and what could change. This doesn't mean you lack values. It means your values are informed by context. You understand that most human behavior exists in gray areas, shaped by circumstance, fear, and incomplete information. You may also notice that you struggle to fully relax your mind. Even during rest, thoughts drift, connect, and evolve. Your brain doesn't switch off easily because it's designed to explore. This constant activity can lead to mental fatigue, but it's also the source of insight, creativity, and problem solving. Your mind is not restless because it's broken, but because it's active. Another sign is your tendency to feel misunderstood even when surrounded by people. You may have learned to simplify yourself to be more acceptable, hiding complexity behind humor, calmness, or silence. Over time, this self-editing can create loneliness, not from lack of connection, but from lack of recognition. Intelligent people often feel seen only in fragments. You might also feel a quiet dissatisfaction with answers that don't evolve. Once you understand something, you don't cling to it forever. You update beliefs as new information arrives. This intellectual flexibility can look like indecision to others, but it's actually growth. You're not changing your mind randomly. You're refining it. If you've ever felt that your intelligence hasn't protected you from pain, that's because intelligence doesn't shield, it exposes. You understand loss, impermanence, and limitation more clearly. And while that awareness can hurt, it also builds depth. Shallow happiness is easier, but it's also fragile. Ultimately, being smarter than you think doesn't always feel empowering. Often, it feels heavy, quiet, and isolating. But over time, this kind of intelligence compounds. It shapes judgment, character, and long-term fulfillment. It doesn't rush to prove itself. It waits, observes, and slowly builds a life that makes sense from the inside out. Another sign you're smarter than you think is how strongly you react to wasted potential, especially your own. You're not just disappointed by failure. You're disturbed by stagnation. The idea of living below your capacity unsettles you, even if you can't always articulate what your full capacity looks like yet. This inner tension isn't self-hatred. It's an awareness that something more is possible, even if the path toward it is still unclear. You may also notice that you learn more from observation than instruction. Instead of relying solely on being told what to do, you watch how people behave, where systems fail, and how patterns repeat. This kind of learning is intuitive and experiential. It's slower on the surface, but deeper in impact. Over time, it builds judgment rather than just knowledge. Another subtle indicator is your discomfort with false certainty. When someone claims to have everything figured out, you instinctively question it. Not out of arrogance, but because you understand how complex life actually is. You know that confidence without reflection is fragile. This makes you cautious about declaring final answers, especially about people, success, or meaning. Intelligent people also tend to internalize responsibility quickly. You may blame yourself for outcomes that weren't fully under your control. This can be emotionally heavy, but it comes from a strong sense of agency. You believe your choices matter, which is a powerful mindset when balanced, but overwhelming when taken too far. You might also find that you struggle to explain your struggles to others, not because they're insignificant, but because they're abstract. Mental exhaustion, existential tension, and identity conflict don't translate easily into simple complaints. So you stay quiet, carrying weight that has no obvious name. If you've ever felt like your mind is preparing you for a future version of yourself you haven't reached yet, that's another sign. You think in long arcs. You imagine who you're becoming, not just what you're doing next. This forward-oriented thinking can make the present feel uncomfortable, but it also gives your life direction beyond immediate gratification. One final sign you're smarter than you think is how deeply you care about coherence between your values, actions, and inner life. Inconsistency bothers you, even when it benefits you. You want your life to make sense internally, not just look good externally. This desire for alignment is rare, and it often slows progress in the short term while strengthening it in the long term. You may also notice that your intelligence shows up more in reflection than performance. You grow quietly. You integrate lessons slowly but permanently. While others chase momentum, you build foundation. This can make you feel behind, but foundations support weight in ways speed never can. Another overlooked marker is how seriously you take your inner world. You know your thoughts shape your reality, so you're careful with them. You don't dismiss emotions as weakness or curiosity as distraction. You treat your mind as something that needs care, not control. That relationship with your inner life is itself a form of intelligence. If you've ever felt that your intelligence isolated you rather than elevated you, you're not alone. Awareness creates distance before it creates clarity. Many intelligent people spend years feeling misunderstood, underutilized, or unseen before their insight finds the right context. Timing matters as much as ability. You may still doubt yourself. You may still wonder why things feel harder for you than they seem for others. But intelligence doesn't always make life easier. Often, it makes life deeper. And depth takes time to translate into confidence, direction, and peace. Being smarter than you think doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being able to sit with questions without running from them. It means resisting shortcuts that would betray your understanding. And it means trusting that the quiet work happening inside you will eventually shape something solid, meaningful, and real. Intelligence doesn't always announce itself early. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, invisibly, through reflection, sensitivity, and persistence. And many people only recognize it in themselves much later, when they realize that the very traits they once saw as obstacles were actually the tools shaping their most honest life.